This flies drive me nuts.
Oh, that's the end of the opportunity attack. He just killed it.
Wally just got an opportunity attack.
Oh,
yeah. That thing's been swarming around. I'm just like.
Hi, welcome to How to D&D. My name is Fred Wheeler, and today I want to talk about Dungeons & Dragons 5e, specifically about what happens if you start taking some of the core rules and tearing them out and making them optional or variant rules. But this is a Dungeon Master roundtable discussion, and I have some friends with me to help me because I couldn't do it alone. Would you like to introduce yourselves?
Hi, folks. I'm Dawn from Roll for Initiative.
Hey, folks. Wally from the Wally DM channel. Thanks for having me, Fred.
Hell yeah. And I'm Josiah from the Dungeon Dad YouTube channel. I talk about D&D stuff.
So what would happen if we were to take out the opportunity attack from Dungeons & Dragons 5e? Because actually, Dungeons & Dragons has never really had opportunity attacks until Wizards of the Coast showed up. Frankly, it didn't exist before then. It might have existed as a optional role or variant role amongst all the many roles that were available for advanced Dungeons & Dragons, but it wasn't really there as a role that you used in the standard game, and it's really only a kind of a modern concept. What would be the pros and cons or positives and negatives of actually taking that role and just going rip and throwing it away, and you could use it if you want to, but you decide you don't want to use it? What would be the consequences? What have you got, Dawn?
Taking it out kind of actually makes it less likely that you're going to run into kind of the like stand and hack combat scenario where you have somebody going, well, I don't want to risk getting hit, so I'm just going to stand here and stay in melee rather than risk an opportunity attack if I move back and maybe actually give somebody else who's maybe better suited for melee a chance to get in here and make an attack. On the other side, I think if you take it out, then it takes away some of the strategy of kind of trying to force the monsters and villains to use their reactions for those opportunity attacks. And maybe the okay, well, I'm going to try and provoke an attack of opportunity from this guy so that I know this other person wants to try and get back and get away, so there's less likely they'll be able to use a reaction for that. Or like if you're dealing with somebody who does have some magic, they can't use it for counterspell, or they can't use a spell or some other ability that counts as a reaction. So that's kind of two sides of that I thought of.
What about you, Wally? What have you got?
I've got a couple thoughts on this. As far as opportunity attacks goes, they were new to me when I started playing Pathfinder and 5th edition. And honestly, I think if you're just learning to play the game, especially if you're learning to run a game, I think opportunity attacks, even though they are a rule, I think it's one you could actually just wait to incorporate later as you learn how to run combat better. I don't think they're absolutely necessary to be in there. But with that being said, I really, really enjoy opportunity attacks. And as far as a pro and a con, I think it's going to fall, at least on the player side and the character side, it's going to fall more on what type of a character you're playing. Because if I'm playing a wizard or a spellcaster and we get surprised by bugbears and all of a sudden my wizard's trying to defend himself with a dagger amongst all of these bugbears that are attacking him and has to take a disengage action to get away so that next turn, hopefully they don't come and get in combat range with him again to cast a spell, then I'm going to love it. Be like, you want to get rid of opportunity attacks? Fantastic. What are you going to do in your turn? Well, let's see. I'm hand to hand with a bugbear. I'm going to run away and then I'm going to cast Fireball, which is something you can't do because without taking an opportunity attack, as previously mentioned. But now, as far as a con goes, you've got your barbarians, your fighters, or what have you that are in melee combat protecting said wizard, and they're going to like that. But if they watch the bugbear be like, hey, I'm going to go after the spellcaster, and it just disengages and goes after the spellcaster, and the barbarian and fighter can't do anything about it, then they're going to be a sad panda as far as that's concerned.
So basically they go right round the front line. It's like, oh yeah, you can't block now. That is going to walk right round and there's not much you can do about it until it's your turn. Yeah,
right.
That's exactly.
They'd probably even put a little bit of insult to injury on that. They'd probably just pat you on the chest, be like, "Sorry, big guy, I'm going after that one," or however bugbears would say that. I'm not sure.
I thought this was a really interesting question too, because like you said, Wally, it's something that you don't need in order for the game to function. But I do think that like the longer you play without opportunity attacks, the more little holes in your quasi fantasy realism you'll start to see pop up. A big one being exactly what you're talking about, right? Like if we're talking, obviously we typically think of combat in terms of like the party versus like a group of bugbears or whatever. But like if you think about this, like what the implications of that are in the context of like, I don't know, like a war. There's a bunch of dudes saying, why even have a front line? It's like, oh, excuse me, just gonna get past you here and go start killing the archers. Like, you know, like there's why have dudes with shields? Why have melee combatants at all, right? Like it doesn't add up. But obviously that's an extreme example. I do think one of the biggest, I don't know if I count this as a pro or a con, to be honest. I thought of it as a con, and then I was like, well, you know, I guess if it depends. Yeah, it's a prong. It can make your game a lot more intense if you're using flanking. I know it's not a secret to anyone here or anyone who's watching this that also watches my channel that I detest flanking as an optional rule. But let's say you are using flanking in a game, you take out opportunity attacks. It's like it's a clown fiesta now, right? It's like, oh man, I don't even have like the biggest setback to trying to get flanking is that some creatures, like you have to evade opportunity attacks while trying to like get into position for the advantage. That's the consequence of that. And it's already kind of easy to do that. But if you take opportunity attacks out altogether, okay. I mean, again, flanking is an optional rule as well, but it's just, that was like the first thing I thought of is I was like, oh man, if you're using flanking and you take this out, that's going to like change combat in ways that I think are completely unforeseeable until you do it for the first time. And then you'll just watch your players or the enemies decimate the party too, because that always, as everything, cuts both ways, right? So yeah, I don't know if that's my pro or my con, but that's just a fact. I think that the biggest con is that it does nerf and delegitimize a lot of character builds and character options. One of the first things that came to mind is the swashbuckler rogue, because their whole thing is you can attack and then you backstep away, which is kind of fulfilling that class fantasy of, you know, you picture your high seas swashbuckling pirate type character doing cool stuff with their rapier and then like stepping back with their fancy footwork. I think that's literally what the trait is called. It's called fancy footwork. And that just like goes away now. Like they can still do all the stuff they'd be doing, but it feels less cool to be that character and then step back. Whereas your barbarian can go in and be like, yeah, me have axe, do the same thing, and then step back beside the swashbuckler. And the swashbuckler is like, oh, I guess you can just do that too. And also, one of my favorite characters I ever built was a swashbuckling rogue who took Booming Blade, which is a classic build. You know, you go up, you stab someone, you hit them with Booming Blade, and then you step back, which then forces them to come to you if they want to keep engaging with you, which then sets off your Booming Blade, which causes them to take even more damage. It's a very nasty combination, and like stuff like that just goes completely out the window. That said, I'm like, there are a ton of other things that have to do with opportunity attacks, like the Sentinel feat is another really strong example. I've seen characters built entirely around that feat.
Caster too,
but that's, yeah, like there's tons of really cool ways in like Polar Master, just like locking down zones can be really satisfying to witness. I think that it's worth noting, if you're going to do this, if you don't have any characters in your party who are using any of those builds or abilities or feats, like great, easy, who cares? No one cares. But if you have someone who say wants to play a swashbuckling rogue or something that's going to benefit from opportunity attacks existing in your game, maybe don't say no, don't do that, but also don't let them just like build a character whose main feature is not going to work in your game. Maybe consider coming up with some type of alternate ruling for how that could work. Like, I don't know what that ruling is. That's going to depend on everyone's game and characters and like the vibe you're going for. But I would be inclined to give that character something else, at least, that can help add or fulfill that class fantasy, you know?
So I was thinking about this, and it's pretty clear to me that the cons or negatives tend to fall on the player's side rather than the dungeon master side. So if you're the player, you're the one who's probably going to lose out the most. And like, disengage is a core rule. You can just forget about disengage. You don't need to disengage anymore. You don't have to use your action to burn that up. You can just move and attack, and then move and attack, and still got your bonus action. So if you do this and you take out the opportunity attack, disengage no longer exists in your game. Essentially, it's a waste of time even worrying about that. The mobility feat, which is really very much built around opportunity attacks, well, don't even bother using it because it isn't going to work. And as you said, Josiah, Sentinel, and then combining something like Polearm Master, well, that's a very common thing. It's a bit cheesy, but players love it. It's gone. It's not over. It's no longer an option. The rogues class, when you get to level 2, they get cunning action. Well, part of their cunning action is disengaging as a bonus action. Well, there's no point because you don't have disengage anymore. So that just got nerfed. Goblins have the nimble escape option. That's another disengage. Well, it's gone too. I thought it was interesting how many feats are attached to opportunity attacks. It's like they have built so many. The Warcaster feat is another one. It just got nerfed. It's really almost no point having that now. So you've got to think very hard about that. If you're not going to be using opportunity attacks, then really you've almost got a game where the vast majority of some of the best feats no longer exist. Which might be an easy way to get to a game that you wanted to have no feats in the first place. It's like, I want to play a game which feats optional. I know we all want to play with feats. DM, no, that's not going to happen. I'm just going to get rid of opportunity attacks, and you've just halved all the feats, and you didn't even have to say, we're not going to play with feats because they just don't apply anymore.
That's when your entire party takes the actor feat, and you go crazy as the DM.
And then when you look at the pros for opportunity attacks, and when I think about when I was starting out, we forgot about opportunity attacks. What's an opportunity attack? It was too hard to figure out to begin with. It's actually much easier than it was, but it is less complex. There's less to think about it. Absolutely. Creatures are definitely going to move around, as you said. Like that's going to happen. It's not just going to be the players. The monsters are going to be all over the place. The front line is going to become the back line. The back line is going to become the front line. Everything is just going to shift. And I think it would probably make it a lot easier for kids and for new players to understand ditching opportunity attacks. I'm pretty sure that would be the case. And there's one feat I have a beef with, and that is Sentinel. Because as you guys all know, the Sentinel can lock down any monster. It doesn't matter how badass it is. You just Sentinel it and it's not going nowhere. Flying creatures, if you hit it with Sentinel and it's flying in the air and you've got a character that's flying, suddenly it's plummeting to the earth because it can't move anymore. And if it doesn't have a hover feature, down she goes. So I mean, I can't think of things that haven't got pulverized by the Sentinel feat. Tiamat, when I was running Tiamat got locked down by Sentinel. That's like, it happens so often. And then you think about theater of the mind. How easy is it to adjudicate theater of the mind combat if you're using opportunity attacks? It is extremely difficult. Extremely difficult. In fact, it doesn't really, you stop doing it because it doesn't make any sense unless you absolutely got somebody who says, I'm in the front line and I move away. Then it just doesn't even apply. I know people think that grappling would become more common if you got rid of opportunity attacks, but it never happened in the older version of the game. So why would it happen now? I think that's a false assumption.
Grappling now, especially, doesn't matter. It prevents you from moving, but there have been so many times where I'm rolling a paladin or a fighter or some type of melee character, and it's okay, the Kraken grapples you, and I'm like, good. That's where I want to be. I want to be within 5 feet of it, so that's completely fine. Yeah, exactly. So it's okay, it uses its action to grapple. That's better from a melee character's perspective, then
Yeah.
getting
It's only when you've
a
got
bunch of
like the
damage.
ranged or spellcaster that's like, I want to be as far away from it as possible, that it's a problem.
Exactly. Or a rare exception where you have a creature that has a follow-up to grappling, like a gray render, where it's like you've been grappled, you're like, oh, who cares? It's like, well, you're gonna care next turn when it double crits you and rips you in half. But for now, like, yeah, who cares?
Thanks, Dungeon Dad.
Yeah, exactly. Taking out opportunity attacks, I was just thinking about this while you were talking, and you mentioned like the monsters moving around. That sets up a lot of really potentially like dangerous, but not like interesting dangerous, like stupid dangerous positions. Because like say you have a character, even like without the sentinel feat or whatever, like just a melee character, and they're in a situation where they're doing what I've seen happen in many a dungeon. They're blocking the hallway, right? Like how many times have you been in a 10-foot hallway and you have your two melee characters, like the barbarian and the paladin are up front and everyone else is behind them, and they're preventing all that crap from getting past them. If you're in that situation, a lot of the times the reason that it's like manageable is because there could be 20 bugbears in that hallway, but only 2 of them can get up close enough to attack at a time, right? And then once they've made their, or that's right, because bugbears, bad example, they have a 10-foot reach specifically. But okay, sure, even in that situation, you have 4 of them can get up close enough to attack at the same time. If you take opportunity attacks out, there's nothing stopping 2 from coming in. Melee attack, they move away. 2 more come in, attack, move away. You could get like 40 attacks per turn against that character who's blocking off a hallway with 0 consequence. Like it makes hordes of enemies so much more dangerous and so much hard to manage, because a lot of the ways that you can manage hordes is by bottlenecking them, right? So like you only have to, you do it 300 style, you only have to fight 2 to 4 of them at the same time. So as long as you can do that for like a dozen rounds, you'll survive. But like when it's like, that doesn't matter, they just get to attack you every time, suddenly that can become a lot more scary. I think opportunity attacks are way more ingrained in 5th edition than like we even realize. I think if you were to take this out and do a full campaign with it, you would come across a lot of situations where you were like, that you never really thought of before.
Yeah, I think it might work like at lower levels where you do have less of those special abilities and feats that lend themselves to opportunity attacks, which is also when you tend to have like newer people, you start them at a beginner level. So, I think Wally, you were saying kind of like introducing initially, not playing with it and then introducing it later, because it can be a little confusing of like, wait, I only get 1 per round. And I know that can be a bit confusing of like, when does it reset? Why can't I just, every time something runs away from me, I can attack them?
Yeah. And let's face it, if you're playing a new game and you're slowly introducing rules like opportunity attacks, then you're probably also going to slowly introduce things like feats as well. So you could bring those in together.
You do point out, Josiah, the importance of making sure that you don't use hordes of monsters, because hordes of monsters that are strong and melee, not necessarily ranged, because you could have 4 enemies in the front line all attacking with melee weapons, morning stars, but all the runs standing behind are throwing javelins, but javelins don't do quite as much damage as bugbears up close. So yeah, if they're strong in the melee and you go horde, party's probably going to have to make sure they don't fight them, and instead they make friends and make daisy chains and sit in a circle and singing Kumbaya, things like that. Much safer. There's going to be a lot better. Or to decide, we won't do this. There's too many. We're just going to go to the pub and get drunk. It's much easier.
Yeah, it's like whatever. This is not worth it. Also, the very last thing I'm going to add really quick, just because you mentioned it, was Sentinel and someone holding down Tiamat, which is like the most extreme and hilarious example of that feat. That is one of the few feats we've house ruled in our games. Is we've ruled that it doesn't affect anything that's 2 size categories bigger than you. So if you're medium, you can only hit another medium or large creature. But if it's huge or bigger, like Tiamat, it doesn't work, because that's ridiculous. Being like, oh yeah, the literal god of evil dragons is preparing to take flight, and your paladin's just like, boink, oh, I hit her for 9 damage on the big toe, and Tiamat's just like, ow, like, guess I'm not gonna fly around and incinerate the earth now, guess I'll just stand here. Like, that's so silly. So that is one house rule that we have found great success with, because like I think that idea of locking down creatures is cool, but I think it's unfortunate that it gets ridiculous to a point. But I think that's a good compromise because it lets you still have that class fantasy of like, you know, fighting in such a way where you don't give your opponent a window to escape. But when it starts to get like ridiculous, it no longer becomes an issue.
So there we go. We've given you as much as we can on what would happen if you decided to take your opportunity attacks and then just ditch them. And you'll let us know down in the comments whether you've actually done this before, and if you're thinking about doing it, let us know how it turns out if you wind up actually putting it into place. Thank you, everybody, for sharing your insight into this particular rule. And where can they find you if they need to find you for anything?
Well, you can find me on YouTube here at Roll 4 Initiative. That's with the number 4, and Twitter and Instagram at R4I Blog.
And you can find me on my YouTube channel, Wally DM. I talk about traps and puzzles for your game. And I'm also on Twitter at WallyD2.
And you can find me primarily on YouTube, on the Dungeon Dad YouTube channel. You can also find me on Twitter. If you go to Twitter, you're gonna have to search for @DungeonPapa because Dungeon Dad is taken by some clown who had their account banned like 10 years ago.
So thank you for that. Hey, make sure to share, like, and subscribe. Hit the bell button to be notified for all channels. And hey, till next time, keep rolling those 20s.